The leader of those two parties, the Socialist Labour League and the Workers' Revolutionary Party, who's a man named Gerry Healy, who is well known within that world, but probably not that well known outside of the world of the SLL and the WRP and some of their affiliated groups. And I'll kind of use his life story essentially as the thread to talk about these different political parties and where they came from politically. His life story, in one level, in one sense, it's a story of violence, of scandals, of even sexual abuse, accusations that this organization was a cult, accusations that they were engaging in conspiracy theories, celebrities who, for various reasons, got involved. And then at the heart of all that is this one man named Gerry Healy, who has either been conveniently forgotten by people who were once some of his closest supporters, or in other cases, remembered in very negative terms. And his life story could be a very gossipy one, which wasn't the type of story I wanted to tell. But it is definitely a very emotional story for the people involved. But his life story is also, and I think more importantly, a story about Trotskyism, about the political tradition that both gave birth to Gerry Healy as a political activist, and which he also in turn helped to create and recreate. And I've come to see it as a kind of cautionary tale about the tendency that Trotskyism has often had towards schisms and personal animosity, and about what I see as the inherent flaws in so-called democratic centralist parties that often brook no dissent and I think can even act as incubators for predatory people like Gerry Healy. All the other important details that he would later recall about his childhood and early life were exaggerated, if not fabricated wholesale. He claimed to have grown up in very extreme poverty. His family actually owned a quite large farm of 103 acres in a country where anyone owning over 50 acres was considered a so-called strong farmer. He claimed that at age 6, he saw his father be shot and killed by the Black and Tans, which was an outright lie. And as can be heard in the few recordings made of him, his accent, which was mostly a London Cockney accent, but with certain cadences still lingering from the west of Ireland, made him seem somewhat unplaceable. The SLL is really the only alternative to either social democracy or reformism, if you want to call it that, or communism, Stalinism, if you want to call it that. So if you are basically on the left in British politics and you don't want to join the Labour Party because you see it as too capitulatory and too moderate, you don't want to join the Communist Party because you see it as too doctrinaire, your only real option for another party to join on the left is the SLL. As the 60s progressed, and as we say, anti-Vietnam War protests become stronger and stronger, the SLL doesn't really take part in that. And a sympathetic interpretation of that is that they refused to offer uncritical support to the Stalinism of the Viet Cong. A blunter view, and I think maybe a more accurate view, is that they were skeptical of any popular movement that they couldn't control. And this opposition to anti-war protests, which even on a couple of occasions led to SLL members handing out flyers encouraging people not to join anti-war marches, confused and alienated potential allies on the left. The party is not a very welcoming place for feminism or even just for women in general, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more at the end. And this remains the kind of internal culture of the WRP throughout the 1970s. The party remained well known on the left, even if it remained a somewhat small group. They also began to amass a suspiciously large portfolio of capital assets, ranging from a country house in Derbyshire that they used for Marxist educational retreats, a full-colour printing press in Merseyside in the north of England that they used to print their daily paper, Newsline, which was the first and, to the best of my knowledge, only ever Trotskyist daily newspaper in the world. A fleet of 50 mopeds used to distribute the paper nationally, 8 flats in Clapham in London where party members lived, a party headquarters nearby, a network of bookshops in major cities, a network of youth trading centres, a film and theatre company, and a luxury car used by Gerry Healy. At their height, there were 90 full-time employees in the party, which is a quite excessive staff for a party that never really had more than 3,000 members at any one time. How exactly they're paying for all this, I think, fuels a large amount of speculation elsewhere on the radical left in Britain. So there's already rumors swirling around in the late 1970s that are accusing the WRP of being in receipt of money from either the Libyan or the Iraqi governments. When Sean McGamna, a Trotskyist who had once been allied to Healy, made these allegations in print, the WRP tried to sue him for libel. When the BBC ran an expose on the WRP's finances and Middle Eastern connections in 1983, Healy wrote articles in response alleging that this was the work of Zionist operatives within the British media, which really, I think, starts to cross over into a kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about the workings of the British media and it being controlled by shadowy Zionist elements. And I also think some of these stories are actually they're partly the fault of WRP members themselves, including Healy, who are very happy to boost the idea that they have very high-level connections to figures like Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi. And in other ways, these accusations were products of Trotskyism's very polemical culture where charged allegations are just thrown around recklessly. So into the 1980s, this is the party that Healy presided over, and he had a very notoriously authoritarian control of the WRP. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he was expelled from his own party in October 1985 amidst shocking allegations that he had sexually abused at least 26 women within the party and possibly more. The organization split into multiple different factions in the aftermath of this. If people wish, I'm happy to go into more detail about what actually happens there. But I want to end by maybe just talking more broadly about what kind of party this is or what kind of lessons we can take from this history.
Right. Well, there's a time and place for discussion of political issues, which we're more than willing to conduct. But this is a discussion. The prerequisite for any discussion of political issues is historical truth and historical accuracy. And the subject of today's meeting, as I understood it, is the book that has been put out by Aiden Beatty, which is, to be blunt, a scurrilous, slanderous attack on Gerry Healy, on the history of the Trotskyist movement in Britain and internationally. I first must state as a preface to making certain points about Beatty's book is that he contacted me in early 1973 and said he wanted to talk to me about the Workers' Revolutionary Party. I did speak to him, and the first question I raised with him is what did he know about the history of the Trotskyist movement? What had he read? And he acknowledged that he had read virtually nothing. The initial discussion, and by the way, the chats which followed are all documented, and I've published them. He did not have any familiarity with the history of the Trotskyist movement. And then he sent me finally, he was very anxious to interview me. He finally sent me a message asking for a contact for a woman comrade. It was by that point very clear that what he was doing was not writing a history of any serious character, but he wanted to write basically a scandal document of an anti-communist character on the Workers' Revolutionary Party. I asked, by the way, as well, had he read any of my extensive and exhaustive criticisms of the WRP and of the politics and theories advanced by Gerry Healy between 1982 and 1985. He had read none of it. He was not familiar with it, though the critique that I've written probably numbers in the hundreds and hundreds of pages. He was totally unfamiliar and, in fact, uninterested in any of the political, theoretical, historical issues that arose in the conflict in the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And in fact, the central issue which is raised by his book is he presents his book as the work of a historian. But none of the basic qualifications and responsibilities that a historian has in writing history is followed by Beatty. Virtually everything he says is unsourced, unsubstantiated, based entirely on allegations made by political enemies of Gerry Healy. And of course, Gerry Healy had many political enemies, which he accumulated in the course of a long career, among the Stalinists, among the anarchists, among, of course, the Pabloites. This is well known. But I want to just focus on a few points Beatty's book, and I think he has a responsibility to answer it. He begins his book by claiming, and he presents it as the foundational lie of.
Okay, David,
Let me just finish what I'm saying.
we're going to limit the
All right,
comments
but
to 3 minutes a person.
I will not speak that long because we've really published much of this on the workers in the World Socialist website. But he starts by saying that Healy lied when he claimed that he saw his father killed by the Black and Tans. In fact, Healy never made such a claim. There is not a single account based on documents, based on anything Healy wrote, in which he made such a statement. These are all post-1985 hearsays. We will be publishing very shortly a interview with Irish comrades who knew Gerry Healy in the 1960s, who testified that Healy never made such a claim. I have spoken to Healy's daughter. She who is not referenced, by the way, by Aiden Beatty. He never made such a claim. He also claimed this is an entire lie, and it's very important.
Okay, can you kind of wrap it
just
up?
a few? You let other people speak for a.
Well, yeah, there are other people who are on the panel.
Well, but I think I'm speaking as somebody who has firsthand knowledge of Gerry Healy.
There are other people that have firsthand
I know,
knowledge.
and you should let me finish what I'm saying. I'll be finished within 5 minutes.
Well,
The other point he says,
you've already had more than.
Obviously you don't want me to speak and expose this. You gave an enormous amount of time to people to attack the Socialist Equality Party. You'll let me finish making these points about Aiden Beatty's.
Well, okay.
He also claims, and which is entirely untrue, that Healy manufactured his history. He did nothing of the sort. He claims that Healy came from an area of Ireland which was relatively quiet. In fact, Healy was born in one of the most violent areas of the Civil War and Revolution.
That's 100% inaccurate. You have no idea what you're talking about. You are an uninformed clown.
No. Okay, and look, you don't. And by the way, in one point, and what you do not explain in your own book.
Okay, David, we're prepared. David,
I'm not a Zionist, you clown.
David, for the last 10 years of your academic career, you have been extensive.
Okay, David, we're prepared to have a discussion about the history with you giving equal time, but that's not what this is. This is an analysis of the book and with panelists and an open discussion. And
you're muting me the moment I raise issues relating to his background. Why does it?
Okay, look, you had time, and I think that
you did not give him time.
People want to find out what your positions are. They're quite open to go to the
you're not letting me
website.
Speak.
Okay, so
limited amount of time to but you don't. Mr. Beatty is a subject. Why was he financed?
Okay, look, David.
What was your application
David,
to and other institutes to get money?
David, do I have to
give you
a meeting?
Because I'm an academic.
No, you're not. You're not working as. What was the basis?
David, do I have to remove you from the meeting?
Which led.
David, do I have to remove you from the meeting?
David North, in his review of this book on the World Socialist website that I encourage those of you who haven't done so to read, characterizes the book as hack work, and I think it's an apt characterization. Mr. Beatty presents himself as an Irish historian, and that's the hook on which he hangs the subject, because Healy was born in Ireland. One of the most astonishing things about this book is that there's virtually nothing about Irish history, and what there is a false presentation. As far as the Black and Tan story, I looked into this. I wrote on this as well. There is no written source that can be found. It appears that Sean McDomna may be the earliest progenitor of this. McDomna is a notorious liar. He's a Zionist who, among other things, called for the retention of British forces in Northern Ireland and American forces in Iraq. This is the sort of people who were interviewed for this book. One of the knowledgeable sources on Gerry Healy. The first pages of the book contain not a single archival reference to Irish history, and the one secondary scholarly work that is used is misused. And this is just the first few pages. As for Mr. Beatty's funding history, he can, I think that those in this meeting, I'll put in the chat box an article that recently appeared on the World Socialist website. It's quite a history of being funded by Zionist and pro-Zionist sources, including such very outspoken Zionist sources as the Azrieli Institute in Montreal. I've looked at some of Mr. Beatty's books, and they are classically Zionist. They write out of history of the Palestinians. In his major book on Irish masculinity, which is actually a comparative study between Irish nationalism, a very false equation between Irish nationalism and Zionism, the one being an anti-colonial struggle, the other, the quintessential colonizer's ideology. There are 3 entries for Palestinians in the whole book. One could go on. And I think he should answer for these questions. He has not done so. But this book is a hit piece on Gerry Healy. His sources, his so-called oral history project, which he intends evidently to keep under wraps, was conducted with enemies of Healy's that he culled together as his major archival source, so-called. So we're not quite done with this. As David noted, there will be another article that will actually get into Irish history. It's a very fascinating and explosive period in Irish history, including in the west of Ireland. And Mr. Beatty, his characterization of it is completely and utterly false.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Aiden, and then Alex, and then Tom McEwen.
So the reason I don't respond to these comments is because they're stupid, and I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to go back to an actual serious thing that was said, which is what Peter started by saying, that what attracted him to the SCP was its uncompromisingness. And then Peter goes on to say, like, there are problems with the SCP, right? There are these good things about them as an organization. I think there are good things about the WSWS, right? The scale at which it can produce documentation, can produce articles is impressive, but there are downsides to that then in terms of that becomes an end in it.
Okay, David, you have 5 minutes.
We'll make the point again. There is nothing in Aiden Beatty's book which is of a historical character. Historians base themselves on documents. They base themselves on verifiable statements, not third and fourth and fifth ad infinitum hearsay. There's nothing but hearsay in this book. I'm the only one who's speaking who actually engaged in a political struggle against Gerry Healy and produced an exhaustive critique. But what distinguished my opposition to Healy was that it was not of a personal character. I had the greatest respect, and I still do have great respect, for Gerry Healy's role in the history of the Trotskyist movement, which Mr. Beatty never addresses at all. You can't speak about Gerry Healy without, of course, discussing the historical conditions under which the Trotskyist movement fought. Gerry Healy joined the Trotskyist movement in the 1930s when it was a period where mass murder was being carried out, what has been described as the genocide of Trotskyists. He built a movement under conditions in which in Britain, the Stalinists dominated the labor movement alongside the laborites. And Gerry Healy built a movement in opposition to this, first in the closest alliance with the Socialist Workers' Party. He was a co-author and co-signatory of the document which founded the International Committee of the Fourth International. He played a monumental role, and all of those who knew Gerry and worked with him, and that includes, by the way, Alex Steiner, at one point were enormously impressed by his contribution. I think that probably includes you as well, Steve. The subsequent degeneration of the Workers' Revolutionary Party, which, by the way, was documented at length in a document which I co-authored with Kirti Balasaria, never referenced by Aiden Beatty, explained in detail the political issues which led to the generation of the WRP and Healy and Banda and Slaughter's responsibility for that. And we also explained, and as a matter of fact, the issue of violence, sexual allegations, all of this was developed and utilized in the autumn of 1985 by Banda and Slaughter in order to shut down any discussion of the political circumstances which had led to the degeneration of the WRP. Now, as again for Aiden Beatty's book, whether he likes it or not, he presents himself as a historian. And whatever his opinions may be, or other people's opinions may be of the political line of the WRP, that's one matter. There are many people who write biographies of people with whom they don't agree politically, with whom they have differences. But there are certain rules of scholarship. And historians work with documents. He doesn't work with documents. He went into this project. He says he doesn't even remember when he first heard of Gerry Healy. Well, he's not telling the truth. He was active at the DSA at Wayne State University in Detroit. He's very familiar with our political work at Wayne State University. The DSA, of which he's a member, called Police Against Us. He's aware of all of this.
No,
he's not a politically ignorant man. And when he says, by the way, when he says in his acknowledgments that organizations which are in fact pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist organizations were generous enough to see the global and international implications of Healy's activities in the Middle East, well, he should tell us, I'd like to see the document he wrote requesting funding. He is a man who does have a very long and documented history, which can be easily verified, of being funded by Israeli organizations. He also argues, and it's central to his whole conception of Irish nationalism, that Zionism and Irish nationalism are essentially equivalent movements. When anyone who's familiar with the subject knows that the Irish movement, the Irish Republic movement, is one of the great democratic national movements of the late 19th and early 20th century. Zionism is a colonialist movement. To compare the two is a fraud. And we're making the accusation here that this is, in fact, a factional diatribe which was produced using history as a cover to essentially launch a scurrilous attack on Gerry Healy. And even those who oppose the Socialist Equality Party, and everybody has a right to belong to whatever political organization they want, and they're free to criticize the SEP as much as they want, and we can answer them. However, when you write, and you know, Steve, you came to one of my meetings and I welcomed you. No one had any objection to you coming and speaking out against our politics.
And we welcome you and others from the SEP.
However, what Mr. Beatty is doing is something entirely different.
Okay.
I'll finish 30 seconds and I'll finish. He's written a scurrilous, slanderous, lying account, and he's done this in the service of the DSA, the Democratic Party, and those who are financing him. He who pays the piper calls the tune. And that's what's involved here. And Mr. Beatty, you can laugh all you want.
Okay.
You have an obligation to explain
why
your time. Okay,
yes, you do. And you may drop this, but we won't.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
We won't. We have a lot more coming out.
Jerry Downing.
This latest contribution by David North, yet again, he makes the claim that the issues that brought down Gerry Healy were unsubstantial issues. These weren't the real politics that we're really interested in. The sexual abuse of women over the decades that he participated in, the cover-up of these abuses. Well, that's not really politics, is it? That's nothing to do with politics. We're just good revolutionary people and women's oppression, well, that's just a secondary issue that serious political people just couldn't be bothered with. Why should we bother with such a thing? For Aiden Beatty's book, I don't agree with it all, but I do have to say that many of the points that are made are really quite substantial against David North and against the stuff that he does come out with. His WSWS site does produce some good substantial articles on many things that I follow quite closely. But the last thing I want to say is that I try to put forward the very well-known fact that the leader of the second revolution, Abraham Lincoln, was a racist, and that he came out with openly racist things. He said, for instance, that black people should never be made equal to white people. They shouldn't be allowed on juries. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. They shouldn't be allowed to marry white people, etc. And of course, you can't say that to David North because he is a true American patriot who thinks that Abraham Lincoln was the real revolutionary, and of course
One of the greatest figures in world history.
Okay,